What is up, guys and girls? Welcome back to another NFL draft season. I wanted to get this mock draft posted as soon as the playoffs hit, I promise, but I just spent too much time trying to design a new mock draft format for this year, and by the time I was able to get it just the way I wanted, wildcard weekend came and went. Then teams were really quick to hire new coaches this year instead of waiting for the playoffs to finish like they usually do, and when I saw some of those coaching changes and the possible scheme changes that came with them, it made me reconsider a few of the picks that I had penciled in initially. But the biggest thing that impacted the draft had to be the increasingly loud rumor and now fact that Kyler Murray wants to enter the 2019 NFL draft, and he has officially declared. Whether or not he'll actually bail on the Oakland A's is a whole nother story, but either way, he's definitely got first round talent and needed to be included in this mock draft. So here we are, the playoff edition mock draft became the Super Bowl edition, which probably works out better because then the only thing that could be wrong with the order is that you'd flip-flop the final two picks, and we have to go 2 weeks in between the championship game and the Super Bowl, so that leaves us plenty of time to criticize this 2019 NFL mock draft. The first thing I've noticed about the order of the draft and the teams at the top is that we are set up for another year of teams trading up in the draft. Teams like the Giants, Broncos, Redskins, or even the Raiders with all that draft capital could be moving up if they covet one of these quarterbacks. Personally, I'm not a huge fan of any individual quarterback in this class, but in my opinion, in the right system and situation, almost any of these guys with top arm talent have the potential to succeed in today's NFL. Obviously, if you ain't got it, you ain't got it, but those guys usually get filtered out before the college level, or at least during. So I'm going to try and find ideal matches for these quarterbacks and their landing spots based on team needs, offensive schemes, and potential draft capital. Let me know in the comments who you think some teams are that are in a position to trade up to the top of the draft, and who do you think they're going to be targeting. If this is your first time seeing one of my videos, please consider subscribing because mock draft season is now upon us, and now that my weekly pick'em series is almost over, I've got a lot more time and I'm going to be doing some really cool stuff this offseason. The goal for this mock draft is 1,000 likes. If we can hit that goal before the Super Bowl, I'll have the second round of this mock draft ready to post right after the game. If by some YouTube miracle we hit 2,000 by then I'll make the second and third rounds. Hitting the like button really helps me grow this channel, and it is a big reason that we've had the success that I've had so far, so please guys, keep it up. You guys killed it on my mid-season mock draft. Statistically, it ended up being one of my best videos ever, and I spent a ton of time trying to make this one even more visually appealing and entertaining for you guys. So hopefully you all enjoy this one too, and now that I have the base format set up, it should be a lot easier for me to make these more frequently and continue to add player highlights for each pick, even the offensive linemen. I'm also trying something a little different this time. I made team breakdowns for all 32 teams, and I'm going to be giving a brief breakdown of the situation for each team moving forward. So that way the player I select and the reason for it has a little bit more background. I know that some of you hear the player's name and immediately tune out everything else that I say, or anybody doing mock drafts for that matter. So this might help ease you into the idea of a certain player, kind of like a little NFL draft foreplay. I know it's probably a bad idea because some of you still use the little tidbits that you see on here as fuel to go on some crazy rant about how wrong I am. Like, for example, I'm sure somebody's going to look at one of the team needs that I have listed and be like, oh, I stopped watching when you said the Steelers needed a running back because they've got James Conner. You obviously don't watch any football. The you don't watch any football insult is one of my personal favorites on here on YouTube because I'm sure my wife would really disagree with that claim. But anyways, I'd love your personal input on your favorite team's needs going into the draft. So if you want to use the comment section for that, I'd really appreciate it. And then for even extra credit, you could rank them in order from greatest need because I probably don't know as much as you do about your own favorite team, right? My goal with these mocks is really just to have fun with it and start a conversation about these future NFL stars. I'm really excited about the potential of this YouTube channel, and hopefully you will join me on this journey. Let's go ahead and get into it. The Arizona Cardinals are hitting the reset button, so it was imperative that they secured the #1 overall pick. What they do with this pick is going to be key in rebuilding this franchise for the next decade or so. They could stay put and select Nick Bosa and probably be pretty satisfied with the production they get for a decade from him. Or they could try and sell it to the highest bidder and stockpile picks for the future. You could argue that trading down for a bunch of picks is the ideal scenario in most drafts, but this year it's particularly true. The problem the Cardinals are going to run into with trading down is that this is the worst quarterback class in years, and there's no clear-cut #1 quarterback that teams are going to be selling the house for. And it's pretty clear the top 3 teams are not going to be taking a quarterback, with Cardinals, 49ers, and Jets all locked into their quarterbacks of the future. The Jets are actually in the best slot to trade down, with teams getting in front of the Raiders for most likely Dwayne Haskins from Ohio State, or if they see another quarterback worthy as the top prospect. If the Cardinals stay put, they should just grab the edge rusher that they can build a defense around in Nick Bosa. If you haven't seen my breakdown of Bosa, I'll put a link in the description and in the top right corner here so you can check that out too. So I still can't believe that the 49ers allowed the number 1 pick to slip away from them like that. I mean, they got swept by the team picking in front of them. That doesn't make any sense. There's not a lot of teams that needed Nick Bosa as badly as the 49ers, and now they may have to face him twice a year. The key to good drafting is taking the best player on the board and not drafting to fill needs. So it's got to be one of the stud defensive tackles at number 2, right? Well, I think that this is another draft no-no, but the 49ers have already spent too much draft capital on interior defensive line, and it's not helping the pass rush enough. And Solomon Thomas is heading into a year where he needs to finally break out. So getting another edge rusher in this draft is going to be key for them. The 49ers are still trying to recreate that Seahawks defense under defensive coordinator Robert Saleh, and I think the perfect option to play that LIII pass rush specialist would be Kentucky edge rusher Josh Allen. I remember jokingly saying before the draft last year that the Bills quarterback Josh Allen wasn't even the best Josh Allen in college football last year, and even though the Bills quarterback impressed me in his rookie year, I think he's about to be the second best Josh Allen in the NFL too. While the Kentucky Josh Allen has shown great ability to play in space, I don't expect 4-3 teams to pass on him because he's just such a good pass rusher too. I think he's going to test extremely well during the draft process, not only physically but when he's getting interviewed by the old NFL heads also. He's got a great reputation in Kentucky and is a leader on and off the field. And when it comes down to the 49ers draft board, pass rushers are going to get the nod over these interior defensive linemen. I'll tell you what, I had such an awesome breakdown of the Jets situation before they hired Adam Gase. I figured that they'd probably sign a brash, offensive-minded guy, and not just because of Sam Darnold, but because teams typically look for a guy that is almost the complete opposite of the guy that they just had to fire. And they definitely did that with Adam Gase. I was hesitant to give them a defensive player before because I didn't know what kind of scheme that the next coach would be employing, but with Greg Williams as the defensive coordinator, it's clear that they're going to be running a 4-3 bounty defense. This is a defense that allows safeties to make a big impact, so I can't wait to see Jamal Adams in this scheme. But as far as draft goes, I'm leaning towards offense here right as of now, and I think that offensive tackle from Alabama, Jonah Williams, is a clear-cut number 1 offensive line in this draft and would be an important step in having a fully functioning offense for the future. The Tom Brady era is coming to a close, and having a legit left tackle will help rise your franchise quarterback towards being the next top dog in the AFC East. With this draft so loaded on defense, I think that the Jets could secure the best offensive line in the class and then use a majority of their remaining picks filling in the gaps on the defensive side of the ball. The Raiders are the most draft-rich team in the NFL, and it only cost them 2 of their best players. When trying to predict what John Gruden and new GM Mike Mayock will do in the draft, your guess is really as good as mine. John Gruden has proven to be a wild card in the past, and he's saying right now that Derek Carr is his quarterback right now. But if the Raiders get on the clock and he has the pick of the litter of the quarterbacks in this draft, will he still be able to resist taking his quarterback of the future, or is he going to let Derek Carr write out his contract a little longer while he finds a guy for cheap, with the idea of developing him for down the road? Mike Mayock always took a beating on social media, but I've got to admit I always liked his perspective and overall knowledge of the game, and you can tell that he truly loves scouting players. This really could be an ideal duo with Mayock and Gruden, so I expect them to take the player that will make the biggest impact now and down the line. Both guys have preached about what it means to be a Raider, and I think that that's going to be key into who they pick with these 3 first-rounders. Maurice Hurst was a great pick late in the draft last year, but the health concerns will always be there, and Jonathan Hankins, he was just a band-aid fix because he wasn't generating any interest from the other 31 teams in the league. Guys, it took me a while, but I am finally on board with Quinnen Williams as a top 5 prospect. I wasn't woke to his dominance early in the season because honestly, I didn't watch a ton of Bama games because they were always like 21-0 in the first quarter, and there's no shortage of exciting games to watch on Saturdays. But as the season progressed and I heard more about him, I've done my research, I watched the LSU and Georgia games, and I was easily convinced. I haven't soured on Ed Oliver like many have, but I do see Quinnen Williams as a near equal prospect that's had NFL quality coaching at Alabama. I think that my favorite part about him is that he doesn't have the wear and tear that a 2 to 3 year starter has that plays for Nick Saban, and then the injuries to come along with it. The Bucs have moved on from Dirk Cutter and signed Bruce Arians as their new head coach, and an underrated move was getting Todd Bowles in as their defensive coordinator. After they've really spent a lot of resources building a strong passing game, I think getting Bowles some help on the defense is going to be imperative. Last year's first-round pick Vita Vea really started to come on strong as the season progressed, and this defensive line could be the strength of the defense moving forward. I'm not sure what happened to Vernon Hargreaves because I thought he was a can't-miss kind of prospect coming out of Florida, but he's not even close to reaching his full potential, and he probably never will at this point. I still think that the Bucs missed out on Derwin James last year, but this year they find themselves in position to once again get the top defensive back in the draft with the highest ceiling. Greedy Williams has a Richard Sherman frame with even more athleticism than Sherman could have even dreamed of. Once Greedy Williams gets into an NFL weight room, he's going to be a top corner in the league for a long time because he is built for covering the prototypical number 1 wide receiver. Add me to the long list of people standing on the table for the Giants to draft a quarterback last year, but I'm probably on a very short list of stubborn people who still think it was a mistake to take a running back at number 2 overall. And before you overact and tell me how good Saquon Barkley is, I know, and I knew he was going to be an instant success in the NFL. I even thought that the Browns should consider him at number 1 overall, but that was only because they had the number 4 overall pick also, and therefore another shot at a quarterback. They really wanted Baker Mayfield though, and if they took Saquon at number 1, Darnold goes number 2, and Mayfield probably goes number 3 to the Jets, leaving them with one of the Joshes in Rosen or Allen. But Nick Chubb looks like a steal in the second round because that's the best place to find a running back, in my opinion. There just isn't the value of taking a running back so early unless it's the final piece to a puzzle. If the plan was to shift the offensive centerpiece from Odell Beckham Jr. to Saquon Barkley because they knew they wanted to eventually move OBJ, then I see the long-term vision a little bit more, but nonetheless, the Giants still need a future quarterback to bring some energy into this passing game because it turns out that Davis Webb wasn't the future after all, and Kyle Lauletta couldn't get on the field. When you look at some of the previous Ohio State quarterbacks, it can be one of those programs to scare you away from future prospects. But Dwayne Haskins is not like those guys. The past Buckeye quarterbacks were all really good at one thing. Typically it was their mobility under Urban Meyer, with the exception of Cardale Jones just having an absolute cannon. Haskins is more of a pocket guy and doesn't have that Cardale cannon either. While he showed some first-year starter flaws at times, like coming into a game a little bit tight and getting better as the game progressed, but I think that his greatest strength is actually going to be reading a defense. He's a smart dude, and if you look at the other Urban Meyer quarterbacks to have success in the NFL, there's only one, and it's been Alex Smith, and he's one of the most intellectual quarterbacks in the league. I have no idea if Haskins is quite on his level, but I think that he is a great fit for Pat Shurmur's offense. But like I said, the Giants may end up having to trade up to get this guy, or else somebody else is going to do that in front of them. Do you guys remember when the Jaguars were good for like a year? Man, those were the good old days. This team was set up through a combination of the draft and free agency for a 3 to 4 window of Super Bowl runs. After the second season of those runs, it looks like they're about to blow the whole thing up. Blake Bortles reverted back to the guy we all knew and figured that he was. Fournette couldn't stay healthy. Jalen Ramsey was calling out every quarterback in the league before the season even started, and the defense as a whole took a few steps back. This team needs a new quarterback, but their salary cap is fucked. They currently project to be $23 million over the cap, and signing Bortles to that extension last year means that he's going to cost an estimated $16 million in dead money spread out over the next 2 years when they cut him this offseason. Unless they find a team to make a Brock Osweiler type of trade like the Browns did a few years ago with the Texans. The Jets and the Colts are the only teams with that kind of cap space, but that was a unique deal, and I'm sure if another team would be willing to do that. But the Jets did give up a second rounder to get Darnold last year, so they could recoup that pick with a trade. Anyways, if the Jaguars actually end up trading Jalen Ramsey, just go ahead and tear the whole damn thing down like the Raiders. But I think that this team needs to continue to live by their defense, make amends with Ramsey like you did with Fournette, and then wait until the second round to get a quarterback. This draft is loaded with second round talent at the quarterback position, but if you reach on one at number 7, you'll miss the chance on getting one of the true impact players on defense. And after moving on from Dante Fowler last year, the Jaguars could use another pass rush prospect. Florida State edge rusher Brian Burns is going to be a fast riser up the draft boards this season, and I can't wait to see his numbers from the combine. He's not just a freak athlete though, he's a leader and managed to produce when it seemed like no one else on that Florida State team was. So assuming the Jaguars are able to fix their cap situation, and this is a process that could involve moving on from guys like Malik Jackson, Calais Campbell, and Marcel Darius, moves they likely anticipated and why they drafted Taven Bryan in the first last year, they should be able to sign a low budget free agent like Tyrod Taylor or Teddy Bridgewater, or maybe even swing a trade for Nick Foles, and then try to maintain their defense as the strength of the team with young prospects to replace the veterans that they had to release. This team looks like it might be a fun challenge to rebuild in Madden, but there might be tough times ahead for the Jaguars. This defensive heavy draft is going to be an important one for Matt Patricia so that he can finally unleash his genius on the NFL. Somehow he managed to screw up the one positive thing the Lions had going for them, and their offense became stagnant and ineffective. Jim Bob Cooter went from being a hot head coaching candidate with one of the best names in sports to just a guy with a weird name that eventually got fired. They're trying to shift towards a more run heavy offense, but without a healthy Kerryon Johnson, they should have opened things back up again and let Matt Stafford do his thing as a volume passer. There's not a lot of positivity to build off of from the 2018 edition of the Detroit Lions, so Matt Patricia might be looking for a defensive coordinator job if this draft class doesn't make a big impact in 2019. Ed Oliver is still one of the best prospects in this draft class, and for him to still be here at number 8 would be an absolute steal. A lot of people were blowing up the argument between Ed Oliver and then head coach Major Applewhite over Oliver wearing a team coat on the sidelines that was only for players that were active, and he wasn't active for that game. Major Applewhite stems from the Nick Saban coaching tree, so he was likely trying to maintain the rules and standards that he get set up and didn't want to let a guy that had pretty much quit on the team undermine him. I get it, but you don't want to be caught on TV pissing off the prized recruit over something that seems so menial to the rest of the world. And that rigidness likely led to him being fired from Houston. While Ed Oliver probably does have some maturity issues, and what 21-year-old doesn't, he might go through some early growing pains as he transitions away from the city of Houston for the first time in his life. But this dude is a baller and should be a generational talent as an interior defensive lineman. Matt Patricia has a little of that small man complex and might not be a great head coach for Oliver, honestly, but the Lions would be hard pressed to let a talent like this slip past them. The Bills were supposed to be one of the worst teams in 2018, and while drafting the top 10 still means you're among the bottom third of the league, I think that they showed a lot more potential and growth in their first year with Josh Allen. After the first month or so of the season, they had a guy retire at halftime and looked like the worst team in the league. I wondered if Sean McDermott would even be brought back as their head coach, but they rallied and they showed good effort in games, and they appeared to be drastically outmatched in some of them. It was pretty obvious that they lacked offensive weapons, and that was holding this team back. But Robert Foster came on late, and I think his emergence actually allows them to pass on a wide receiver in the first, with not a lot of guys worthy of a top 15 pick. They traded Cordy Glenn to the Bengals last year in a swapping of first round picks, and that was a solid move because Cordy Glenn wasn't getting any younger and had injury concerns that popped up in Cincinnati, and it was a cheap price to pay to trade up for a franchise quarterback. They are already following in the Jets' footprint to build for the post-Tom Brady era, so they might as well double down and address the same position, get an offensive tackle to help stabilize the offense early on in this draft. While everybody is grabbing the defensive players in this draft, the Bills could probably get some steals in later rounds to build this offense up, but it doesn't work if they can't win in the trenches. I'm not a pro scout, so obviously I'm not scouting these offensive linemen regularly, but from a combination of what I'm hearing and seeing from Dalton Risner, he could end up being one of the top offensive tackles taken in April. West Virginia offensive tackle Yadni Kajus is the other guy I'm really liking from the limited action that I've seen, but Dalton Risner seems like one of the bully types that just beat down edge rushers into submission. He can get beat by the smaller, quicker guys, but he's going to make them pay with physicality and good technique. The Broncos are quickly turning into a bit of a dumpster fire. John Elway was one of my favorite childhood quarterbacks, and I was really excited for him to get his shot to build the Broncos, and his reputation and clout in the NFL is partially what lured Peyton Manning to Denver. And then he took another one of my favorite childhood players in DeMarcus Ware, and they made a Super Bowl run together with one of the last great championship defenses we might ever see. John Elway admitted that he knew going into the 2018 season with Vance Joseph was a mistake, but he did it anyways. I questioned the hire to begin with, and then they made a 4-3 defensive coach stick with a 3-4 system, which is probably mostly based around their prized defensive player Von Miller being an ideal fit for the 3-4. Bradley Chubb, he was obviously a good pick, but he's a prototypical 4-3 edge rusher, so I thought that the Broncos might hire an offensive coach with a 4-3 defensive coordinator maybe, but they hired Bears defensive coordinator Vic Fangio, who has run some really good 3-4 defense in his time. My issue with Fangio is that he's always run so many different defenses because his units always begin to decline over his tenure, and teams just eventually move on. The Bears defense wasn't even a top unit until they added one of the best defenders in the NFL. He's got a solid core in Denver, so I fully expect this unit to be a top unit in 2019 if, and that's a big if, the offense doesn't put them under too much pressure like they did this year. Case Keenum and the Vikings probably wish they could go back in time and sign an extension together for much cheaper than the one they signed Kirk Cousins to, but Keenum is going to end up being a bridge quarterback to a rookie in the final year of his contract. New offensive coordinator Rich Scangarello was the 49ers quarterback coach last year and was also the guy who convinced Kyle Shanahan to sign Nick Mullins as an undrafted free agent in 2017, so he's got an eye for quarterbacks. I'm assuming that John Elway is going to want to draft the anti-Paxton Lynch and find a guy with the confidence and the intangibles similarly to the ones that he brought to the table as a player. That guy in this class is undoubtedly Will Grier. Grier's a little smaller than Elway would probably like, but like I said, he's going to overcorrect after Paxton Lynch, and it's not like Will Grier's a midget, he's 6'1". I'm not the biggest fan of Grier, and haven't even had him in the first round of my previous mock, but the talent level in this draft class dropped off significantly when Justin Herbert returned to Oregon, and it's going to force some guys up quite a bit. My reservations with Grier are that he's 24 years old, limited physically, and I don't know if he's got much room to improve as a quarterback. But on a defensive team like the Broncos, where they really just need an alpha male at quarterback that can make a play when it counts, well, that sounds like a perfect fit for what Will Grier brings to the table. The Cincinnati Bengals will have new leadership for the first time in 15 years. Marvin Lewis was finally let go, and they're expected to hire Rams quarterback coach Zach Taylor as the next head coach. Bengals fans are probably also ready for a new quarterback after years of Andy Dalton, but I expect the new head coach to see what he's got and maybe grab a late round guy he thinks would fit in the system. This is a veteran Bengals squad with some young, solid pieces that they could build on, so they probably expect a quick turnaround in Cincinnati, and you're not going to do that with a rookie quarterback. The offense has all the weapons to be explosive, especially if John Ross can stay stay healthy and have that third-year wide receiver jump. If there is an offensive line prospect that they fall in love with, I could see them upgrading there, but there's a position that I've been trying to get the Bengals to upgrade in my mock drafts for years, and with concussion issues threatening Vontaze Burfict's career, such a shame because it couldn't happen to a nicer guy, I think that this is the year that they need to do it. Malik Jefferson was a great pick in the 3rd round last year. He didn't have the best rookie year, but he didn't really get the chances you'd like to see out of such a physically gifted player. Marvin Lewis was saying things like that he wasn't quite mentally ready yet, and he probably stunted his growth a little bit, but Devin White could be the Mike, while Jefferson is more of a Will, and this would give the Bengals a really explosive duo at linebacker for at least the next few years, and turn a position of need into a real strength. White and Jefferson are both linebackers built for tomorrow's NFL, and by that I mean that they can really run and they excel in pass coverage. If you're a linebacker that struggles in coverage, you better bulk up and try to play as an edge rusher, because the NFL needs fast linebackers that can play in space moving forward. The Packers were the first team to hire a guy that I actually had to Google him to see who the hell he was. I was a big fan of the Titans offense going into the season, so I should have done my homework and seen who Mike Vrabel hired as his offensive coordinator, but I'll be honest, I thought a monkey could have run that offense centered around Derrick Henry. It took Matt LaFleur until December to unleash the beast, and who knows how good that offense could have been had he realized that a little bit sooner. It will be interesting to see how this young guy meshes with Aaron Rodgers. Aaron Rodgers has a lot on his shoulders after running Mike McCarthy out of town, so he's got pressure on him to get along with LaFleur. The Packers are keeping Mike Pettin on as defensive coordinator, which I think is a great idea. The biggest need is going to be to get him some more guys to play along the defensive line. Kyle Fackrell was a nice surprise as their leading rusher, but they're probably losing Clay Matthews in free agency. Clelin Ferrell is a top 10 player in this draft, and if he's still available at 12, I think it's hard for the Packers to pass on him. My only hesitation is that Mike Pettin has a background as a 3-4 defensive guy. He ran a lot of 4-man fronts because of the personnel, but Clelin Ferrell is an ideal 4-3 edge rusher, but I wouldn't pass on him from the Packers perspective. Florida edge rusher Ja'Kai Polite is another option if the Packers want more of a traditional 3-4 backer. After firing Adam Gase, the Dolphins are expected to move on from Ryan Tannehill, Robert Quinn, Devontae Parker, and Andre Branch this offseason. So this franchise is hitting a hard reset on the roster. Last year, I was mocking Lamar Jackson to the Dolphins pretty hard, and they essentially wasted a year trying to get one more season out of Tannehill, and then they allowed the Jets and the Bills to get a head start on building for the post-Tom Brady era in the AFC East. Now it's a year where the quarterback class is somewhat tragic, and they might be better off with a tank season and just focus on grabbing as many impact defenders in this loaded draft as possible. This could be a spot for Kyler Murray, but the Dolphins are expected to be naming Patriots defensive coordinator Brian Flores, and I doubt this is the splash move that they would make in his first draft, especially with him coming from the Bill Belichick no-nonsense tree. Jim Caldwell is expected to join the staff as an offensive coach, and he's never seemed like the kind of guy that wants to run anything more than a traditional drop-back passing attack either. Building a formidable defensive front seems like the ideal place to start this rebuild, and there's a ton of defensive tackles in this draft to choose from. Christian Wilkins is my next favorite on the list, but Jeffrey Simmons could also be an option here. Wilkins is a true 3-tech defensive tackle, but could play almost anywhere on the defensive line at a high level. This time last year, I hated him coming back for his senior year, but it paid off so much for him, and he was such a big part of the Clemson Tigers winning it all this year. His leadership qualities could be crucial for Flores, changing the culture in Miami. The Falcons bringing back Dirk Cutter is a nice move because that offense has a pretty similar personnel to his previous time with the team. Under Steve Sarkisian, Matt Ryan had one of the greatest seasons ever by a quarterback, just to be let down by pretty much the rest of the team. They suffered some really unfortunate losses early on in the season in the form of both games and their impact players on defense. I still think this team is one to be reckoned with moving forward and is only a good offseason away from being back in contention for the NFC South. The luxury pick of Calvin Ridley last year injected some speed and youth into their passing game, and he should have an even bigger role in the Falcons offense in his second season. The offensive line is an area that they could look to address early on in the draft, but unless there's a player that just blows them away, I'm going to assume they look for more depth on the defensive side. Despite missing the college playoff due to performance-enhancing drugs or whatever it was, Dexter Williams is the perfect fit for this defense alongside Grady Jarrett. Now that's assuming that they re-sign Grady Jarrett, who's up for a new deal this offseason. They tried to fill this role with Dontari Poe a couple years ago because a big presence like this would really open things up for their small pass rushers. And yes, I do realize that this was 3 straight Clemson defensive linemen in a row. That was merely by accident, no intention on doing that on purpose, just the way the cards fell. The Redskins are in a weird place right now. They've moved on from a majority of their coaching staff, but they kept Jay Gruden. That's usually a sign that the head coach is on his last chance to show some signs of life. The defense is the strength of this team right now, so with Gruden being an offensive guy, I'm sure the team is expecting a little bit more from that side of the ball. But with the brutal injury to Alex Smith, this team needs to get a young quarterback for him to build the offensive around. If not next year, the year after that. Jay Gruden made Andy Dalton look like a top 15 quarterback in this league with the Bengals, and he hasn't really had a shot at picking a quarterback in any draft draft yet. Alex Smith was a band-aid they settled for because he was made available and would be a cheaper and more reliable option than most of the other guys in free agency. Because Jay Gruden has never drafted a top quarterback, I'm actually not sure if Drew Lock is a good fit with him. If you look at the quarterbacks he's coached in the past, none of them have possessed an arm like Lock, which might be the strongest in the class. Most of the quarterbacks he's worked with in the past have been more accurate and conservative passers, but that's partially why I think he could go for Drew Lock. I think he believed that he could corral him into playing within his system, but having the cannon to prevent this passing game from being so much of a half-court offense as it was with Alex Smith, and then stretch the field a little bit once in a while. Drew Lock has really struggled with being a consistent passer at Mizzou, and I was hoping to see a lot of improvement from him with an ex-NFL coach taking over as his offensive coordinator, but maybe Jay Gruden is the guy to rein him in. The 2018 Panthers really fell off a cliff when Cam Newton injured his shoulder, and now there's a report that has since been dialed back a little bit, so take it for what it's worth, but Cam Newton might need an Andrew Luck type of recovery period and even miss the entire 2019 season. Even though the report was a little bit refuted, I'm not really sure how you would qualify this, Panthers owner David Tepper obviously sees the value in that idea. Hopefully Cam heals with just some offseason rest, surgery if necessary, or you're going to see the Panthers at the top of the 2020 draft. I'm going to assume he recovers and base this off the idea that the Panthers will be back as NFC South contenders in 2019. I said I was uneasy about the fit with Clelin Ferrell and the Packers earlier. Well, this is about the furthest I could see him falling. That would be one of the easiest marriages in the first round, but I'm not sure that he's going to make it all the way to 16. With the pass-heavy NFC South, the Panthers need to slow down their division rivals, and Deontay Thompson is the next great Bama safety. If he didn't have such a rough game in the national championship, we'd be talking about him as a top 10 prospect, so don't be surprised if he climbs up draft boards as we move through the draft process, and that allows everyone to get away from the stale taste that the national championship left in everyone's mouth. The reason that I say that is because this is one of the more physically gifted of the safeties to come out of Tuscaloosa, and he was a playmaker at a position where it's really hard to find those. Mike Adams and Eric Reed both have expiring contracts, and Adams is going to be 38 this year, so he might even retire, who knows. I think that the Panthers will probably bring Eric Reed back, but either way, the Panthers are in a great position to grab an impact defensive player at a position of need at number 16. Wow, it's crazy to see the Browns picking this late in the draft without it being another team's first round pick that they acquired by trading down and probably passing on a franchise quarterback. The Browns promoted interim offensive coordinator Freddie Kitchens to head coach, and the Browns offense really stabilized when Kitchens took over. Around the same time, their need for offensive tackle just kind of evaporated when Greg Robinson took over for undrafted free agent Desmond Howard at left tackle. That's right, former number 2 overall draft bust Greg Robinson. I don't think that he's the guy at left tackle for the future. That still might be Desmond Harrison, but what I think that both of these guys provide for the Browns is options for 2019. If they love an offensive tackle in this draft, take them by all means, but that's unlikely in the first round with this crop of prospects. I could see them trying to add another playmaker for Baker Mayfield and be the ones to start that run on wide receivers, but I think that they like the young prospects that they've got, and they have to feel like they stole Brashad Perriman from the Ravens because he looked really good with the Browns last year, so they should turn their attention to getting some more talent on that defense. Even though they spent the 4th overall pick on a cornerback last year, they've got quite a few expiring contracts, and there are some real ballers still on the board here. Obviously, Denzel Ward was on another level as a prospect and wasn't quite as small as Murphy, but they have similar game as scrappy, undersized cornerbacks with great ball skills. This Browns secondary would be scary good with the two of them playing on opposite sides of the field, and then Jabril Peppers really came into his own at the end of the year. Hopefully that continues under new defensive coordinator Steve Wilks, but the Browns defense is definitely looking up next year. While the Browns are thrilled with a season that resulted in picking in this range here, we're now entering the extreme disappointment tier. These next 3 teams were a play or 2 away from making the playoffs and really have to hit on these picks if they're going to make the necessary steps to move forward in 2019 and actually make the playoffs. The Vikings paid $84 million for Kirk Cousins, and unfortunately, NFL contracts don't come with receipts, especially not fully guaranteed ones. This might go down as one of the worst contracts in NFL history. I should have known better than to believe in Kirk Cousins after seeing him up close with the Redskins. I live in Redskins country, so it wasn't often that I missed one of his games or had to hear about how awesome Redskins fans thought he was, but I remember seeing quite a few times that he had a tendency to come up short in big moments. I think the Vikings as a whole thought that they were getting this quarterback savior and that he was going to make everyone's job a lot easier. I've said it before in this channel that complacency in sports is a bitch, and it may have cost the Vikings a season in a small Super Bowl window. But when it comes down to it, Kirk Cousins might just be the same as Case Keenum, and if you have a higher expectation than that, then you're just going to be let down. To win with a defense like that, you need to have an effective running game, and hopefully new offensive coordinator Kevin Stefanski can commit to being consistent in his running plays in 2019, especially if this offense wants to have success. The loss of Tony Sparano was tragic, and there's no replacing one of the best offensive line coaches in the league, so the Vikings are going to need to improve that personnel. According to PFF, Cousins was the second most pressured quarterback in the NFL in 2018, but his poor pocket presence has to take some of the blame. Regardless, the Vikings are stuck with Cousins right now, and getting an offensive lineman in the 2019 NFL draft is a must. Mentioned Yodny Kajust earlier as an offensive lineman that I really like, and the Vikings would be a great fit for him. He seems like he possesses the ideal blend of athleticism and strength that you want to see in a prototypical left tackle. He played in a productive, pass-happy offense, but he's got the power to be effective in the run game too. He did tear his ACL in 2016, but 2 years later, and he seems to be completely recovered from that. The Titans were one of the biggest disappointments for me in 2018. I thought really highly of this roster, and even though they were only a game away from the playoffs, I felt like they could have ran away with this division earlier in the season. They allowed two teams in their division with an 0-3 and a 1-5 record to overtake them and make the playoffs. This offense was probably what frustrated me the most. I thought that Marcus Mariota was finally going to take a step forward and become a top-tier passer, but he's really been just an injury-prone game manager thus far in his career. I think the loss of Delaney Walker really hurt the passing game because he's been a safety blanket for Mariota for quite some time, and that forced him to rely on some pretty inconsistent wide receivers. I thought Corey Davis would have a breakout season, but he was limited to really only a few good games. And don't get me started on the coaching staff thinking that Dion Lewis is more important to establishing a consistent running attack than Derrick Henry. I drafted Derrick Henry in so many leagues last year, and I recommended it to everybody here too. And I ended up only having him in like 2 of my leagues by the time they decided to finally utilize him. This team went heavy on defense in the last draft and got 2 important building blocks for years to come. But DeAndre Baker could be really tempting in this scenario as an eventual replacement for an underachieving Malcolm Butler, or maybe Deontay Thompson if Kenny Vaccaro is not in their long-term plans. But if Noah Fant is there still, the Titans need to grab him. Fant's basically a big wide receiver playing tight end. He excels in getting downfield, and he's got great size for the position. Think of him as like a slightly bigger Evan Ingram with even better route running ability. Delaney Walker, he's getting up there in age, and both tight ends could be used on the field at the same time while Fant continues to develop as a blocker. But this offense needs to be able to threaten defenses more vertically, and they just were not able to do that this year. The Steelers probably take the cake for the biggest disappointment in 2018. From the Le'Veon Bell situation to tying the Browns in week 1, to then needing the Browns to beat the Ravens in week 17 to get into the playoffs, and just everything in between. And now they get the drama with Antonio Brown lingering into the offseason. They're probably going to lose the best wide receiver in football over some off-field drama, or locker room drama, I should say. It's ironic that they finally got over the Patriots hump in a season where they don't even make the playoffs. Assuming Big Ben comes back, Antonio Brown is traded, and James Conner is the starting running back in 2019, I think this offense will be fine. The defense is really what needs to be addressed. I thought last year's pick of safety Terrell Edmonds was odd considering he was widely viewed as like a 3rd rounder at best, and I think his play in his rookie year was kind of indicative of his evaluation going in. And linebacker will be an easy position to plug in a player here since Ryan Shazier hasn't been replaced, but I honestly don't think we'll ever see Shazier back on a football field. But I don't think that they want to replace him with a 1st round pick, mostly because the optics of it all. They plan on signing Shazier to a special contract that will allow him to continue his recovery and rehab as a member of the Steelers. I'm sure it's not going to be quite as much as a starting player would get, but it was a good gesture by them, so like I said, I don't think that they're going to want to counter that good judgment with a move that'll make it look like they've already moved on. The secondary still needs to be addressed, and with DeAndre Baker still on the board, this should be easy for the Steelers. DeAndre Baker is one of my favorite prospects in this draft. He's not as physically or athletically gifted as Greedy Williams or Byron Murphy, but his instincts are immeasurable compared to them. Local Penn State product, I'm going to try to not butcher this, but I probably will. Amani Oruwariye would be another option here if the top 3 cornerbacks are gone. The Seahawks season was one where they accomplished way more than the preseason consensus projected. And show me a mock draft that had them taking running back Rashad Penny in the 1st round last year, and I'll show you a liar. So projecting what they'll do in the 1st round this year seems like an impossible task, but I'm going to do my best here. In the playoff loss to the Cowboys, the downfield passing held them back. Well, not the actual play, but the play calling. So maybe they should draft a new play caller. Maybe it was a lack of confidence in the wide receivers, and after they tried to revive the career of Brandon Marshall last year, I could see them trying to get Russell Wilson another big target like that. I love DK Metcalf. He is one of my favorite, if not my top wide receiver in this draft. And after the neck injury, I actually wanted to see him go back to school so you could get a full season of film of him just dominating college defensive backs. He's got one of the highest ceilings at wide receiver in this draft, but the only question I have about him is his long speed. So his 40-yard dash at the NFL Combine, along with obvious medical checks, are going to be crucial in determining if he's a 1st round pick. He's actually a great blocker in the run game, and that's why I think he could be such a good fit for this offense if they want to continue to be a run-first team like that. He's actually such a good blocker that if he ends ends up running a 4.7 or 4.8 40, I really don't think that he will, but if he does, I could see him making a transition to tight end and being an OJ Howard level freak at the position. The Ozzie Newsome and Joe Flacco era, respectively, have come to an end. And for the Ravens, it's now time to prepare for the Lamar Jackson show. It still amazes me how quickly fans turned on him in the playoff game against the Chargers, but you really couldn't expect that style of offense to go unscathed with the rookie quarterback forever. Lamar Jackson was a project as a passing quarterback coming out of college. And I think he showed some really good flashes of getting it done. He's going to be one of those guys that every once in a while, he throws a pass that makes you question if he's legally blind. Seriously. But with that, you get game-breaking explosiveness and playmaking in a way that we've only ever seen maybe once before with Mike Vick. Give him time, let him grow, and improve the offensive line. But this offensive line is not as bad as that playoff game made them look. So I don't think it's a round one necessity to address the offensive line. Now is the time to get Lamar some young weapons around him that he can grow with and learn to depend on throughout his career. A running back makes a lot of sense here since one hasn't been taken yet. David Montgomery's probably the best running back in this class, I think. But that's because there's not many others worthy of a first round pick. Since wide receivers take a little time to develop and they went the veteran route last year to restock the position, the Ravens need a guy that can replace Crabtree and Willie Snead as the possession guy. John Brown, he seems like he was a free agency steal, and N'Keal Harry could be the underneath guy to Brown's deep threat. Harry's also great at getting rack yards and would give Lamar Jackson a nice big target with amazing hands to dump the ball off to in case he's under pressure, and Harry could turn it into a much bigger play while also offering that deep jump ball threat. The Texans' recovery from the 0-3 hole was pretty amazing, yet overshadowed by the Colts 1-5 recovery. Had they beaten the Colts in the playoffs, they likely would have been shut down by the Patriots the next round anyways once Belichick saw that glaring hole along the offensive line. The rest of this Houston Texans team is actually pretty set. I don't think the entire roster of this team needs to be broken down like that because Deshaun Watson was the most pressured and sacked quarterback in the league by a wide margin. If the Texans don't go offensive line in this draft, it's only because they went heavy in free agency addressing these holes instead. Depending on who you ask, David Edwards might be the number 2 offensive tackle in the 2019 NFL draft, and I totally get it. He was a former tight end that transitioned to offensive tackle while attending the offensive line factory in Wisconsin. Wisconsin Badger guys are always intelligent, blue-collar offensive linemen that seem to go on to have at least an above-average NFL career. And with the recent emphasis on the right tackle not being a drop-off from the left tackle that we've come to expect in the past, we can expect David Edwards to go no later than the first round. So with the Raiders' first pick, they went best player available and selected Quinnen Williams. Is it in bad taste to use the pick that they got from the Khalil Mack trade to put even more pressure on this kid and select an edge rusher to replace him? I don't think so. Montez Sweat is an explosive edge rusher with the length of a guy like Ja'Kai Polite just doesn't have. Sweat is no Khalil Mack, so I'm not going to compare their athletic ability, but he's no slouch, and his non-stop motor is something that I'm sure Mike Mayock, the new GM there, will love. And can't you just see John Gruden really getting a kick out of this guy's last name when they go to study him and be like, man, I'll tell you what, to be a Raider means you got to give blood, sweat, and tears to this team, and this guy will give you so much sweat that he's been named after it. And that's not just a joke. Montez Sweat is an actual dog out there, and he just never gives up on a play. Bruce Irvin. Okay, so the rest of the teams here have made it through to the divisional round of the playoffs, so they obviously don't have the same size holes to fill. So I'm going to try to run through the rest of these quickly. The Eagles made a nice run there at the end of the season to sneak into the playoffs after a Super Bowl hangover. Their defensive backfield was devastated by injuries, but managed to hold it together with safety pins, scotch tape, and guys they picked up off the waiver wire. Like, the defense as a whole wasn't as good as the Super Bowl squad, even though it seemed like they added some nice upgrades like Michael Bennett and Haloti Ngata to an already stacked defensive line. Ngata didn't make the impact that I thought he would, but I really don't think that this side of the ball needs a first round pick spent on it. Once they get some guys back from injuries, it'll seem like they've got a nice influx of talent back there. The position that would scare me the most on this team is offensive tackle. Jason Peters is still playing at a relatively high level when he's on the field, but it seems like he's already on borrowed time and only another injury away from hanging it up for good. Greg Little is a big athletic offensive tackle from Ole Miss, a school in which has a solid track record for pumping out NFL offensive linemen. For a guy as big as Greg Little is, he's not as aggressive as you'd probably like from an offensive tackle mauler type, so he could benefit from a guy like Lane Johnson rubbing off on him a bit. But drafting an offensive tackle would be a way to plan for the future before it becomes a problem that you're not prepared for. Carson Wentz, he's going to need reliable protection so that he can regain confidence of this team and this fan base as in fact their franchise quarterback moving forward. The Colts are going to be a fun team to watch this offseason. They've got more cap space than any other team with over $122 million, so predicting where they could go could change in a lot of different ways based on what positions they address during their shopping spree. A year ago, the trenches on both sides of the ball for this team seemed like a weakness and a liability, but both were actually strengths in 2018. They made a huge turnaround. I remember when Marcus Hunt showed up in Madden, I think it was Madden 25. I hadn't really heard of him before, but I saw his attributes when I was poaching rookies from teams in a franchise I was in with a couple of my buddies. This dude was a physical freak like I had never seen in this game before. He was like straight out of a create a player mode. And I'm glad that he was finally able to find a role in the NFL because I never understood why he didn't make an impact with the Bengals. I'm assuming that they're going to re-sign him there, and because of that, I think that they can address the edge rush in the third round of this draft. The weapons around Andrew Luck, they need to be improved. Eric Ebron was a free agency steal, but besides him and T.Y. Hilton, the rest of the receivers might not make a majority of NFL rosters. As an ACC resident, the Atlantic Coast Conference, I've seen Kelvin Harmon play, and this dude would be such a perfect complement to T.Y. Hilton. Kelvin Harmon is going to get his quarterback Ryan Finley drafted way higher than he deserved. Harmon was constantly bailing him out more times than I could count. This guy's got size, he's a good route runner, and he's great in contested catches. Alright, one last pick for the Raiders in the first round. This time, it's the pick that they got for trading Amari Cooper to the Cowboys. A quick recap of their previous two picks in this draft, I gave them Quinnen Williams at 4 and Montez Sweat at 24. Personally, I think that a first round pick already has enough pressure on them to produce, so it would be unfair to put them in the shadow of players that were drafted in the top 5 of their respective drafts and seem to be in a position to play at a high level in the NFL for quite a while still. I don't usually like to be this basic and predictable with my picks or the reasoning for them like this, but I actually wouldn't be surprised if Gruden and Mayock liked the idea of using these picks acquired in trades for Mack and Amari to draft their replacements with the exact same pick. They're old school kind of guys and probably believe that this kind of pressure is good for a player. Now, if you find the right kind of guys with the right mentality, they could most certainly use that pressure as motivation. And as far as Montez Sweat goes, I don't question whether or not he could stand up to that pressure because, like I said before, he's an absolute dog on the field. But as an East Coast football fan, I have to be honest, I haven't seen quite enough of this guy, JJ Arcega-Whiteside, to know exactly how he would respond. But from what I have seen, I think that John Gruden would love this guy as a player. He's not flashy, he doesn't have any of individual trait that makes him stand out from other wide receivers, but he's just really good at everything you ask from an NFL wide receiver. His size and catch radius are really impressive, and he's winning almost every contested throw. He reminds me a bit of rookie season Michael Clayton out of LSU for the Bucks. John Gruden drafted him, he fell off, but in his rookie season, he was really good. That's kind of who I see in Arcega-Whiteside. Oh, the Chargers. Where do we begin with this team? I mean, they've got one of the most stacked rosters in the NFL, yet still got demolished by the Patriots in the playoffs. There's a few positions that they could stand to have upgraded, but this team is running out of chances with Phillip Rivers. To me, the biggest holes, and I should call them holes, but the positions that they could really improve at to really take their defense to the next level are right up the middle of their front seven. Nose tackle and inside linebacker. Mack Wilson, he might be gone by this time come April. I just didn't see a spot before the Chargers that made sense for him other than the Steelers, and I explain why I don't think that they'll address the inside linebacker position so early, but this is the perfect match in my eyes. Mack Wilson really threw me off when he said he initially wasn't going to declare for the draft and he was going back to school for his senior year, but I'm really glad that he came to his senses and ended up declaring. Alabama has been a linebacker factory since I can remember, even before Nick Saban got there, and Mack is just the latest model. He's got the range and instincts to be a rangy cover linebacker, but is also an aggressive thumper in the running game despite a lack of size. This one isn't tough to break down. The Chiefs had the 31st ranked pass defense in the NFL this year, and they were playing some bums out there in their secondary that were really just trying to get in the way of the opposing offense to try and prevent them from keeping pace with the Chiefs offense. Kendall Fuller was a bright spot. Hopefully Eric Berry can give you a full season in 2019, but Fuller is set to be a free agent after this upcoming 2019 season, so the Chiefs need a guy like Penn State cornerback Amani Oruwariye. Nailed it. The Chiefs have to deal with the Chargers' big wide receivers twice a year. The Broncos, they went out and got themselves a big wide receiver this last year in the draft, and Amani would easily be the Chiefs' biggest cornerback. He's actually really good in man defense, and he would fit the Chiefs' defense really well. He was only a one-year starter, but it seems like he's still got a really high ceiling. With the 14th overall pick, the Packers grabbed edge rusher Clelin Ferrell to help the team move on from Clay Matthews. Last year, they really needed to add cornerbacks, and they went and added 2 of them in the first 2 rounds. That doesn't happen very often, but it seems like it was a great move by the Packers. This year, there's a similar level of need for an influx of talent along their defensive line. Muhammad Wilkerson was a rare free agency move for the Packers last year, but he's had to undergo multiple surgeries for his ankle in an attempt to recover from the injury that took him out in week 3. He was only on a 1-year deal, and he might not be back in Green Bay in 2019. Rashawn Gary is a hard prospect to judge because he's got all the athleticism in the world with a crazy frame, but not the production you'd hope that these physical traits would translate to on the field. If he's still on the board for the Packers at the end of the draft like this, I could see them double dipping once again in the 2019 NFL draft to address their front seven and see if Mike Pettin can really get it done with a better group of talent. One day, Tom Brady is going to retire. I don't know if it's going to be in 2 weeks or in 2 years, but it's going to happen soon. And Josh McDaniels has either been promised to be the next head coach of the New England Patriots, or he's just waiting for the absolute perfect job to open up, which probably doesn't exist. I think he's been promised the head coach position personally, and that they're going to give him the chance to handpick his quarterback when it's time to find Brady's replacement. Remember, this is the guy that made Tim Tebow a first-round pick, and I remember he was so excited about the intangibles of Tebow. He was a leader and a winner in the interview after he made the selection. Whomever gets tasked with replacing a living legend like Tom Brady is also going to have to deal with an immense amount of pressure, and for a traditional quarterback, that's going to be pretty tough. I had Duke quarterback Daniel Jones here in the first draft of this mock, but I didn't get that giddy schoolgirl feeling that Josh McDaniels got when he was talking about Tebow. And then Kyler Murray declared, and the stars just aligned. McDaniels is an innovative offensive mind, and I think the Patriots organization as a whole really gets it and understands the benefit of trying to stay 2 steps ahead of the rest of the league. This could be the guy that replaces Tom Brady and doesn't have the pressure to follow in his footsteps and be such an elite passer, because he would be a completely different player compared to Tom altogether. A decade ago, Kyler Murray would have been moved wide receiver without question. The NFL is changing, and the thing that will actually hold Kyler Murray back from being the first quarterback selected in this draft is not his size, which I do believe he stands at a solid 5'9" and 7/8". What's going to hold him back is his inability to decommit from playing baseball. Not many teams are going to want to spend a first-round pick on a player that could renege on them in a month or maybe a year. If you see Kyler Murray change his stance on playing for the Oakland A's at some point before the draft, you could fully expect him to be a top 5 pick in this draft. But if he doesn't and he stays on this wishy-washy stance that he's on right now, expect him to fall in the draft similarly to the way that Lamar Jackson did, but for different reasons obviously, and end up going to maybe a better opportunity with a coaching staff that's got a little bit more clout and job security for the future, to where they really could build an offense around him. It would be a lot harder to hate the Patriots with such an exciting player like Kyler Murray running read options with Sony Michel in a couple years. The Rams defense couldn't match the production of their offense this year, and they probably never will with Sean McVay putting 35 points on the board in every game. They went all in 2018, and it was never more obvious than when they went and sent a 3rd-round pick to Jacksonville for the 1-year rental in Dante Fowler. They're probably not going to be able to afford to re-sign Fowler this offseason, and will once again have a need at edge rusher. Ja'Kai Polite has been tumbling down this draft board, and he is the perfect pass rusher for their 3-4, assuming that Wade Phillips is back in 2019. Ja'Kai Polite should go way before this based on his talent and athletic ability, but this was just a result of how rich this draft is in defensive talent. We'll see if it helps curb the offensive explosion that we saw in 2018 down the line. The Cowboys defense was really feeling themselves in 2018, but got exposed a little when they went up against a really good offense in the playoffs. It was reported that the Cowboys and Earl Thomas had mutual interest in getting a trade done before an injury ended Earl's 2018 season. How interesting would it have been if they got that trade done and Earl Thomas avoids that injury? We could have gotten to see him single-handedly wreck the Cowboys in their matchup early on in the season, and then flip the side and see him get a chance to play against the Seahawks in the playoffs. There's still a chance that he can sign with the Cowboys in free agency, but he's coming off a lower leg fracture, and I think that that's his 2nd leg injury in the last few years, so you're gonna need to reinforce the weakest spot on your defense with some youth. Taylor Rapp is one of my favorite players in this draft. He might be long gone by the time the Cowboys get on the clock, but another guy that you could keep an eye out for in this range is actually a local product for myself, Juan Thornhill from UVA. Both of these safeties are smart, rangy guys that can come in and play in the box if needed, but they're really great in coverage. I watched a lot of UVA games this year, and Thornhill has the ability to be a really good player at the next level. I thought about giving the Cowboys a tight end here, and I really like the guy from Mizzou being a fit for them as a blocker and receiver, but Stanford tight end Caden Smith doesn't do it for me, and I'd rather just let Blake Jarwin and Dalton Schultz develop, and let's just get the defensive safety of the future here and solve this problem, and solve this positional problem. The Saints' lack of weapons reared its ugly head around mid-season, and they tried to alleviate the issue with Dez Bryant. That obviously didn't work out, and now they don't have a first-round pick to try and get another wide receiver, maybe take some pressure off of Michael Thomas and force the defense to pay more attention to the other receivers on the field. But maybe they don't need another wide receiver at all. I really like Traquan Smith, and I think he can develop into a nice number 2 wide receiver, but as a rookie, you could only expect so much. But the Saints' offense is really missing a presence in the middle of the field like they had with Jimmy Graham and even Kobe Fleener. Ben Watson is one of the nicest and most most likable guys in the NFL, but he's not striking fear into a defense, especially not at this age. Everyone and their grandma knows how deep this draft is defensively by now, but it's also a really deep tight end class, and the Saints are in position to have a pretty good player fall to them. Caleb Wilson has got wide receiver abilities in a tight end frame and seems like a good fit for this offense. This young Chicago Bears team learned what the playoffs were all about in their first playoff game since the Jay Cutler days. They ran into a team that knew what needed to be done to get a win in the playoffs, and they did it. But this Bears team has very few holes and can actually afford to wait this long into the draft, knowing that Khalil Mack was worth every penny and every pick that they paid for him. I don't care that he didn't make a huge impact in the playoff game, because the Eagles coaching staff schemed out quite a few of the NFL's top pass rushing talent during their run into the playoffs. Just get Mitch Trubisky and the running game some more big guys up front, and allow this running game to really get going on a more consistent basis and take some pressure off of your third-year quarterback so he's not always running around for his life. Phew, that was a long one, guys. I appreciate you guys staying to the end, watching, commenting, subscribing, all that good stuff. Don't forget to hit that like button on your way out, and I will see you in the next video.